Entertainment Circle this Sunday. Now, the Human Science Research Council is currently hosting a symposium on language practices in South African higher education institutions in Cape Town. Through guided policy discussions, documentary screenings, workshops, panel discussions, sharing empirical data studies, personal accounts and experience, the symposium is intended to provide an opening to put forward a feasible framework for policy recommendations, future monitoring and evaluation tools and interventions that have implications for improving resources to better meet language challenges at South African higher education institutions. Dr. Alude Mahali is the conference convener for the HSRC, and she's joining us now from our Cape Town studios to tell us more about the objectives of the symposium that is set to conclude on the 17th of September. Very good morning to Dr. Mahali. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Let's start with what the symposium on language in South African institutions of higher learning is and what the objectives are and who is targeted, really.
So I'll tell you a little bit about the inspiration, I suppose, for the symposium in the first place. I've been working primarily in the sociology of education space over the last 5 years, concerned with how individuals experience social institutions, especially how they experience educational processes and development, social development. One of the inspirations for the symposium was a 5-year study, qualitative longitudinal cohort study that I conducted around race, education, and emancipation in South African higher education institutions, called Studying While Black. In this study, we asked who are our students and what happens to them. We were concerned with what were the challenges students experienced at university and also what the strategies they used to overcome those challenges were. Language emerged as a key finding in that study. Language affected students' academic outcomes. Language affected the way that they interacted at university, the way they interacted with management, with support staff, with faculty. It also affected the way they socialized and made friends. And so it came up and emerged as a huge impediment to their progress at university.
Yeah.
The other inspiration was the policy, the ministerial report on social cohesion, transformation, and the elimination of discrimination in public higher education institutions. It's also known as the Sudeen Report. This report urged that there be substantive and sufficient multilingualism at all of our higher education institutions, including support activities. So it's really these two pieces of key work that I've done over the last 5 years that inspired the symposium and really brought this issue of language to the fore. And so the symposium is really a way of reflecting 10 years after the seminal piece of policy. Where are we with our goals? You know, where are the gaps still between policy and practice? How can we do better at sharing information across institutions at all levels? And what do we propose to put forward in terms of improving the way things currently are running? Because there are some issues with how the different policies are being applied and at what levels.
And I suppose that those are some of the unanswered questions that we need answers to, Dr. Mahali. And, you know, mother tongue as a medium of instruction in schools, would this have an impact on how well students perform once they get to institutions of higher learning?
Absolutely. I mean, the research is pretty clear. If learning efficiency and if cognitive development are the goals, then mother tongue instruction really is the way, it really is the language of learning and tuition that should be used. I think oftentimes there are disputes about it because people are ill-informed. They don't know the research, whether it's parents who promote English, African parents who promote the use of English at home due to social mobility and what they think is social currency and global mobility, a lack of political will from government, a lack of government buy-in, a perceived dwindling number of students doing degrees in African languages, as well as the teachers who can teach them. But all of these have been debunked, including the argument that it would be costly. The research makes it clear. If students, particularly black students, had a medium of at least being bilingual or multilingual in that higher education space, that they would ultimately perform better academically.
And just picking up on that point, Dr. Mahali, we see an overwhelming majority of instruction in business is still conducted in English of Afrikaans, which continues to marginalize the non-English speaking students in a great deal. So speak to us about how this will be touched on at the symposium.
I mean, and I think that's what's so critical about policy, is that it's not a one-size-fits-all. It needs to be contextualized, it needs to be localized, and it needs different stakeholders invested. It's not just an issue about academics or academia and universities. It's about bringing government officials, it's about bringing activists, it's about bringing storytellers, it's about bringing everyone who has a stake in this, getting them to collaborate, getting them to share best practices, getting them to share evaluation findings, empirical findings. And so at the symposium, we've done just that. We've invited the Chief Director of the National Language Service in the Department of Arts and Culture. We've invited one of the researchers at the Department of Higher Education and Training. We've invited the CEO of the Council on Higher Education, as well as the CEO of the HSRC, and many activists and academics working in this space to really think through, debate, challenge one another, but more importantly, share what's working and what isn't, and how they think things could be changing for an improved future.
Now, just a decade ago, about the 2008 ministerial committee report, which looked into, you know, the institutionalization of language. So, what sort of interventions have been made to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of the language policy, Dr. Mahali?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because that's precisely one of the issues. Each and every one of our public higher institutions have language policies. They have them, and much like many of our policies in their country, they're quite beautiful, they're quite inclusive. But again, what happens in theory and what happens in practice are two different things. I will say that there have been tremendous strides made at universities like UKZN, where as of 2014, they had instituted isiZulu as one of the key languages of learning, particularly for degrees around health science and journalism. Rhodes soon followed suit. University of Limpopo now has bilingual degrees. And then there are really amazing scholars at UWC and UCT agitating for change around this language issue. Profs Antia, Prof Dyers, Prof McKinney, all these folks will be at the symposium as well. And so it'll be great to hear firsthand the kind of unconventional tools they're using to address this language issue. They may not be in policy, but they're finding creative ways of going around or working through this language issue.
All right, Dr. Mahali, we thank you so much for your time, and all the best in this symposium.
Thank you so much. All
right, it's an absolute pleasure. Well, a symposium on language practices in South African higher education institutions is taking place in Cape Town until the 17th of September. We've just spoken to the conference convener, Dr. Alude Mahali, who joined us from Cape Town studios to discuss this. We'll take a quick break now. We'll be back in a flash.
Visuals, they're busy shooting.
We drove around this.